So I'll talk a little bit about the different roles in radio and podcasting. Obviously, radio and podcasting, quite separate industries, but lots of crossover. Because lots of radio shows are now podcasts, and lots of people who work in radio also work in podcasts. But the industries work slightly differently. Usually when I say to people, like, I'm working on a radio program, they even my parents are to the ages to understand, that they weren't going to hear me on radio shows when I'd been producing a radio show. They were like, I didn't, just couldn't quite get their heads around it. So yeah, a lot of people assume that the only job in radio is presenting. It's, there's a lot that goes around that presenter and around that finished product that you hear. So of course there is a presenter, the host, there's a producer, which I'll go into a little bit more about what that involves. And then there's the exec producer who will oversee the producer and the whole production, have a sort of bigger, a sort of more overview role. There's commissioners, there's sound designers, mix engineers, studio managers. So that would be like in a live radio station, if you're hearing Radio 2 or Radio 4, if you're hearing live discussion stuff, that would have a studio manager kind of overseeing all of that, and bringing the guests in on the line and stuff like that. You've also got music and playlisting teams at Radio 1 and Six Music. I can't really talk about commercial radio because I've never worked in commercial radio, but I assume they would have that there too. You have assistant producers, sometimes called broadcast assistants. Broadcast assistants slightly more entry level than assistant producer. There's also production coordinators. Then you have often a social team, marketing teams, live events teams, development producer roles, particularly for podcasts, as there's a big push for narrative podcasts, and it's a really kind of exploding industry at the moment. So people ideas are like currency, and then taking those ideas, getting the talent, that's all development. Production managers and production coordinators that generally look after the more logistical side, so the finance, the bookings, studio bookings, travel bookings, again, that kind of, and sometimes you might have a researcher, especially if you're on a very, on a sort of documentary or narrative podcast type production.